Good evening, Canes fans, and welcome into the 8th episode of the Rod the Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Betts, and as always, I'm joined with my co-host, Mike May. How are we doing tonight, Mike?
Doing awesome. Excited to talk about the invigorating topics that we have.
Is that why this episode's called Doldrums and Draft?
Yeah, I always thought like Doldrums was like a place in the mountains, so I didn't even know.
Not like an old sail, not even old sailing, but like there's no wind on the water.
Thought it was a foggy mountain.
Right. So it's kind of like the opposite. Okay, so clearly we're off to a hot start here after not recording for like 12 days, but we appreciate you guys sticking with us. Interesting episode, kind of another one-off outside of our off-season series. Tonight, we're going to talk about the draft, and we've been promising you this for a while, but there was just so much going on in Canes land that we wanted to devote, plenty of time to that, and so we're going to now pivot over to the draft finally. But before we get into that, the big NHL news, what do you think about jersey ads coming to the sweaters, Mike?
It seemed inevitable, and I feel like we can look at our guy, Tommy Dundon, as probably somebody that pushed heavily for that, being one of the first people.
Yeah, you got to imagine the ownership meeting that there was one big driver for this. And,
sure.
They're all money-driven individuals. You don't, become a billionaire on accident for the most part. But, yeah, I got to feel like one of the biggest voices in the room was Tom Dundon. And after this year, obviously, with many teams operating in a deficit due to COVID, this was much more appealing than it probably has ever been.
Yeah, for sure.
What is your general thought on the patches? I mean, they're already in the NBA.
Yep.
Do you hate it? Do you not mind it? Does it not really bother you?
I don't think that anybody will notice it after 10 games.
Yeah, I kind of felt that way about the helmets. And to be fair, the PNC logo on the helmets, which are staying, I don't know if it'll be PNC, but helmet advertisements are staying moving forward. I didn't find those intrusive at all. No. I thought, for the most part, we had one of the better logos on our helmets because it just blended.
Yep.
No announcement yet on who will be on the Canes sweater. I kind of hope it's like that. For example, with the Charlotte Hornets, Lending Tree actually kind of works with the color scheme.
Yeah.
I just don't think, Canes sweater, you don't want some blue patch. And that's just being particular.
Yeah.
I'm glad it sounds like they're not going to the European model where it's going to be the Wild West. The patch is apparently going to be 3 by 3.5 inches. I'm okay with it. To me, it's more color. What about you?
Yeah, I think if they have some flexibility to match the team's color scheme, I think it'll be even better. At the end of the day, I don't think it's going to matter even if they don't. You look at Stanley Cup patches, 20th anniversary patches, you name it, that go on the jerseys already on certain seasons. It doesn't really
I feel like it's that first game or two, you notice them, and then after that, it's like just part of it. And like I said, you just become accustomed to seeing it all the time. I'm fine with it. Do we assume that for individuals like ourselves that like to purchase the sweaters that they'll show up in the team store or not?
I think the authentic jerseys will definitely have them. We'll have to see from there. I don't know if Fanatics brand or something like that's going to have them or not. I would think the sponsors would probably want them on as much or as many surfaces as possible.
I would assume that would allow the team to charge more too.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd be curious from the fan reaction, not only to this, but if you were to buy a sweater, would you want it on there? And so maybe that's one way to, when you guys are listening to the episode, don't be afraid to reach out to the podcast on Twitter and kind of give us your thoughts, not only on the sweaters and if you'd buy it with an advertisement on it, but on anything. But what is your general consensus? Do you think fans are going to be turned off by purchasing something with a logo on it?
Some will be, for sure. There's going to be, and I don't know what the percentage would be. If I was guessing, I would think it's less than the majority will have an issue with it. I just think at the end of the day, people are going to want to buy the new jerseys. I mean, it's set to come out in 22, 23. And so are you going to not buy a Stadium Series jersey? Right?
Not going to pass up on the opportunity. I mean, we've been anticipating those sweaters for a minute.
And once you buy one jersey with a patch on it,
you're in. Like it's already happened.
Yep,
You've taken the plunge. Yep. Something tells me we'll both be doing that just because for some reason we are kind of addicted to it, which is sad. But hey, here we are. We're doing a Canes podcast.
Here we are.
So I think tomorrow, maybe on Instagram and Twitter, we'll put up a poll to see if people would buy the jerseys with the sweaters and just see what the feedback is, and then kind of recap it the next episode. But getting into the big meat and potatoes issue of Doldrums and draft, it's obviously the 2021 amateur draft that occurred last month. Canes consensus, as per usual. I mean, I know we were critical last episode of the organization, but universally, this team always seems to draft well. That's Canadian media, American media, wherever you look, they always grade out highly. They have since Tom Dundon took over the team. This year was no different, even though, to the chagrin of many Canes fans, no first round pick because they traded out into the second. That was just one of 5 trades the team made, and ultimately culminated in 13 draft selections, which is a franchise record. Mike, read off the list of guys, and then just give me, you're the prospect and draft guy, give me your insights on these fellas.
Yeah, so trading out of the first round, it sounded like the consensus from the organization was that they felt like they could get the guys they wanted in the second round. And if that's what you think, then that's a no-brainer decision. They ended up making 3 picks in the second round, and they got guys that they liked. So,
so before you read off the names, just from like a scouting perspective, although there are now 32 first-round picks, there are, regardless of the sport, there are not generally 32 first-round talents. In the NFL, that number is usually in the 16-ish range. So generally, it's from prospects, 16 to 20 down to 40 are all kind of the same level. So if you're in the Canes and you have a back 20s pick, I guarantee that the guys you have slotted there are the same as the ones that you eventually ended up drafting. Like, you wouldn't do it if it took you past a tier break. And so I'm sure they felt like they got immense value because they got a guy equivalent to what they would have probably already taken, in the late 20s.
Yep, for sure. I mean, they probably were ready to pick him right away and said, hey, he'll probably slide. So I would assume that they had that plan for some time, unless somebody that they totally didn't expect to drop to them at, I think it was 27, right? If someone didn't drop there, then they would have. The one name, and let's do it round by round for a little bit. I think the one name that I think fans were maybe a little surprised they didn't take because the drop was so precipitous was Rattay. And, he ended up going, 51 to the Isles. Well, no, 51 was Kane's pick. I can't remember what the pick was.
It was after we had already made a selection.
It was after I think it was after our third.
But it was the Islanders. And clearly we weren't the only ones that passed. He dropped that far. And it was just kind of rare for a guy that, was the consensus number 1 overall pick entering the year to fall so far. This is not something I would ever critique the organization on because they're not scared to take a swing on high upside skilled players with flags or performance. Like, they've drafted so well because they are the team that will, take the risky pick.
They take big swings, yeah.
So they must not have deemed him as the big swing. And hey, for whatever his performance fell off, this organization believed that was more real than just a, flash in the pan slump year. So I trust them. Canes, who'd the Canes select first?
So their first pick was round 2, pick 40, and that was Scott Morrow. So the first 2 picks they made emphasized a weak point in the pipeline being defensemen. It's good to see them do that because it was somewhere where we had gone from having a massive pipeline to having a very shallow pipeline in just a matter of a couple years. So seeing them go for 2 consecutive defensemen, the first one being Scott Morrow, the second one being Alexei Hemoslamy. And honestly, they're 2 guys that are high risk, high reward kind of guys. Their ceilings are very high. There's a chance that they don't make it. They've got certain aspects of their games that they have to figure out. Scott Morrow, he's U.S. product, finished up the year in the USHL playing for the Fargo Force. He's a guy that is very high skilled. He was regarded as one of the higher skilled guys in the entire draft class as a defenseman. He's big, he's offensive, he's right-handed. There's been talk that he may have some maturing to do, but that's something that when you have that skill level, you maybe take the chance on that. So he's definitely got high upside, but a lower floor.
So with those two guys, I think what we're looking at here is, to your point, one, it's amazing how quickly the surplus of defensemen dried up, and some of that is guys graduating to the league. But it's just so funny that what was once considered a great strength is now quickly evaporated. And so when you're thinking about prospects, I know generally we're looking 2 or 3 years down the road, but for performance or trades or for any number of reasons, that number, where you perceive as having a strength can become a weakness, and then vice versa. So it's good for them to attack that. And by drafting Morrow and the other young man in the second round, Tom Dundon got to keep his promise that they will never draft a defenseman in the first round as long as he's the owner. So maybe that spells why they traded out and then drafted Morrow. But otherwise, I think we're very pleased with what they did with those two guys, because it's all about upside. One thing, as critical as we've been at times, the organization totally understands that you can find depth around the league and you don't have to pay an immense price for it, but use your draft assets on guys that can not only make it to the NHL, but can make an impact in the NHL.
For sure.
And I really love that, because at the end of the day, when you get to the playoffs, it's the most highly skilled teams that generally seem to win.
Yeah, and we got Himasami with 44th pick, and he's a young defenseman out of Finland. And, he's a two-way defenseman. He's got great skating, predicated mostly off his edge work, which is super important. He fits the Hurricanes model in the sense that it's mobile. He's a mobile defenseman, and that's kind of the way the NHL is moving. He's, again, just like Scott Morrow, has got extremely high upside and a lower floor, but those are the kind of risks you want to take, because both of these guys could hit and be a top 4 defenseman in the NHL. And if you find those in the second round, then you're really happy with that.
In the second round, we have one more second rounder to talk about, but the second round is a round that the Hurricanes have been excellent, traditionally, and really gained a lot of value compared to, other organizations, from the Sebastian Ahos of the world, Justin Falk, and, goes down from there. But who's that last second rounder for the Canes?
And the last one was the 51st pick. It was Ville Koivunen, also from Finland, and he actually plays on Sebastian Aho's dad's team in Finland. That's Karpat, and his game is very much the Hurricanes model, right? He's known for his high compete and his offensive skill. He's a character guy.
Familiar.
Character guy, and one that Harry Aho raved about and was like, this guy is big time. His size and skating are his weaknesses. Those are both things. Growth and getting into a weight program can change the size part quick. And skating, it's just a matter of, number one, can he improve there, or is he limited? And if he can improve, then you're looking at a guy that could really be a top 6 difference maker on your team.
But yeah, even here in the second round, you got to remember, as I said before, there's only so many first round caliber prospects. So once you get past those guys, everybody's going to have a question mark. And so a second round pick, basically all these guys are essentially top 50 overall selections. They're going to have question marks. So, but it's one of those things where, as an organization, do you believe that you can develop the prospect past the point and get a value on them? And I think with all 3 of these young men, we really feel like that's the case. It seems with the general consensus that everyone else seems to think so too. So a pretty exciting time. And honestly, for me, as I don't delve as much into the prospects or draft as you do, all I know is when I see a young man drafted from Finland, my ears perk up a little bit, because seems like they got a pretty good pipeline there. They have connections, and then they've done a terrific job of scouting and bringing in talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were able to get both of those signed to their ELC already, that being Hemasami and Koivunen. Both have already signed their ELCs, which is so it shows what the organization thinks of them already, to get them locked in year one. So exciting times ahead for those guys. We'll move into round 3 really quick, where the Canes made 2 selections, the 83rd overall pick and the 94th overall pick. They kind of stayed in the same mindset of improving the depth on the back end, being defenseman and goalie. With the 83rd pick, they took Patrick Hammerla, a goalie out of the Czech Republic. The scouting report for this guy is his frame. I believe he's 6'3". He has a large frame, but already has NHL quickness. He's ultra aggressive, which can be a good thing, and kind of reminds you of somebody like maybe Peter Mrazek, also from the Czech Republic. And his game just needs maturing, but he's 18 years old. He's a goalie. We all know goalies usually take a little bit longer, so we'll be interested to see how he progresses over the next couple years, see if he can take steps and if he might actually have a shot at being a goalie of the future.
All right. One thing I got to say now that we're already in the 3rd round, I'm glad you're the one reading off these names, because we were reading them before recording the pod, and I was totally embarrassing myself.
You can just call me the butcher.
I think we might have a segment at some point where it's like Jordan reads European names, and it's bad. I'm so cultured. But any last notes before we talk about our 4th round pick and then the 2 5th rounders?
Yeah, we'll just really quickly talk about the 94th pick in the 3rd round. Another defenseman from the U.S. National Team Development Program, and that's another great name. Aiden Hershuk, I believe is how you pronounce it. He's a guy best known for his hockey IQ, can play in all scenarios. Biggest knock on him is the need to improve his skating and his strength. And obviously those are huge factors to NHL success. You have to be able to skate, and you got to be strong enough, whether it's on the boards, on the puck, whatever it may be. So it's another pick that if he develops and grows in those roles, you could look at it and be like, that was a fantastic pick. So we like it.
It's almost like you could say that about
A lot
all
of
their
them.
guys, and even deep into the draft. But heading here into the 4th round, another American, Jason Blake. I can say that name.
Jackson
Jeez,
Blake.
I can't say his name.
Jason Blake is his father, who played in the NHL, but yeah.
Oh, apparently
Jackson.
I can't read either, but Jackson Blake, forward American. What do you got?
So his whole game is smart, super competitive. He's obviously got the hockey pedigree with a dad that played in the NHL. He needs to physically develop. That's the biggest knock on him at this point. He's in a really competitive team in the USHL, being the Chicago Steel, so he's definitely going to have to earn his role and his time for development. So he's a guy that you like to take that risk because it's in the family. He knows what it takes to be an NHLer. He's been raised to know what it takes. So you like to take a chance on a guy like that you know is going to work.
Yeah, maybe to a lesser degree. Obviously, he was taken the 4th, but it's reminiscent of Jack Drury. And you draft guys with pedigree. They grew up in it and around it, and so they just understand and what it takes. And from a family perspective, the investment, all those things where I think it would be easy to overlook it because there's so many tremendous athletes across the spectrum of sports that don't have family pedigree, but I think when it does show up, it's significant. And so he's a young man that, although only a 4th rounder, definitely a name to keep your eye on, because those guys just seem to get it.
Yeah. And he's a guy that will be willing to find his niche in the NHL as well. He's not a guy that's going to, I'm making this presumption, but based on what I've read about him, he doesn't seem to be the guy that's going to say, no, if I'm not getting second line opportunity, like I'm out. Like, he's going to earn his role and he's going to put his head down. And I already heard his dad say, I believe, that he was super excited for him to potentially have the opportunity to be coached by Rod Brendamore and things like that.
Well,
Doesn't
his
matter.
dad gets how significant that could be.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, into the 5th round, Robert Orr.
Not Bobby Orr.
Any relation?
No relation. Oh my, that would be something. Right,
Now, if I wish I would have read that Bobby Orr, and then he could have played.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's a forward guy, super skilled player. There is a ton of disagreement on his actual foot speed. Some people think it's an asset to his game, and then some people think he needs to work on it. Darren York from the Hurricanes organization seems to think that his foot speed is an asset. So I read a lot about him, and it seems to be a mixed bag. That's somebody that we'll just have to watch and see develop, and hopefully get a chance to see in training camp.
Well, if the foot speed is there, that puts him on an entirely different, prospect trajectory, because he has all the skill and ability. But something to monitor. And when you get this late in the draft, you're almost looking at what is almost one trait that a prospect can hang their hat on that can be a differentiator for them. Because if the rest fills out, well, then you have an elite trait already.
Yep.
It's building on a strength. And I can speak to my time as being a very low level prospect. Like, you're always talking, diversify your game, be able to hit the ball the other way, and you want to be good on defense, and all those things are important. But the further I got along in my career, it was like, hey, you're a power hitter. Forget about, slapping the ball the other way, hit homers. And it was like, oh my gosh, like, build on a strength. And that makes so much sense because you're never going to get probably the other parts of your game, to where they need to be, or being an above average trait. So your elite trait needs to be exactly that, because it becomes your calling card. So I get that. And, although we're not putting a ton of stock in maybe any of these guys compared to, their peer teams, Kane's got a lot of talent 4th through 7th rounds. I mean, it's just different. And when you read a prospect overview of a draft haul, very few of the analysis of the analysts that do the analysis talk about the guys drafted late. And it seems to be every year they talk about the guys that the Canes take late. That's awesome, because it's just showing the organization has a plan. And although we haven't, the plan this offseason hasn't resonated with us, there's clearly one when they draft, because they're really good at it.
Yeah, they definitely are. Next pick in the 5th round being another pedigree guy, and Justin Robidas. So another forward, just like Robert Orr out of the QMJHL. Robidas is a smaller player, but he's known for his speed and compete, and he's got that hockey pedigree. He has offensive upside, but needs to work on his two-way game. So he's a fast guy, knows how to create offense, needs to be better on the defensive end. His father had an NHL career, so it's another guy that you hope understands what it takes to succeed. And, you don't hate taking chances on guys like that in the 5th round.
And heading into the 6th, Bryce Montgomery, another defenseman. Yeah. What do you got on him?
This one was a little off the board from what I read. He's a big right shot defenseman who hasn't shown too much to date, and you're really just taking a chance on him developing over time. He had a very limited sample size going into this season. Either the Canes saw something they liked in that limited sample size, or they purely went off the fact that he's a big right shot defenseman that had glimpses of skill, whatever it may be that they were looking for. So he was a little off the board, but they must think that there's something there that's worth the risk in the 6th round.
Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is, what's the opportunity cost in a 6th rounder? So swing the bat on your guy. If he hits, great. If not, you've essentially lost nothing. The Carolina Hurricanes' 2nd 6th round pick, another goalie. I'm not even going to try to say this name. You got it.
Nikita, are we going to say Cap?
Cap, but it's spelled with a Q.
Yeah, we're just going to call him No Cap.
Sorry, I didn't brush up my German before I came over tonight.
Nikita No Cap is a goalie from Germany, as Jordan alluded to. Another large goalie. He's shown flashes of high upside, but he's got a lot of development to do. He's a project goalie. Same scenario. Big
guys,
guy.
yeah, kind of guys you take late though because they have a physical trait, and for him it's size.
Yep.
And it's weird that in a few years, 4 or 5 years, you'll totally have forgotten the name, and then he's starting meaningful games for the Canes or some other organization. You'll go, this guy was a 6th-round pick. It's amazing how many of those guys, especially at goalie, exist in the league.
Oh yeah, well, who was it? Nashville Predators goalie.
Saros.
No.
Pekka. Pekka was a
Rinne
super late pick.
Was a super late pick, and look at what that turned out to be.
I think that worked out all right for them.
Yeah, it worked out great. So you never know.
I wouldn't mind if that happened.
I mean, the Canes need it. We've talked about it. Having a high ranking goalie.
And people have liked the guys they've taken. I know they took the young man in the second a few years ago, and it's developing nicely. It's just they don't have that like gold star goalie prospect. And the forward depth in the prospect pool is incredible. I think we feel better about the defensive depth after this draft haul. But the glaring need, for really since Cam Ward came up, has been there's no elite goalie prospect. Analytically, that probably makes sense. It's not a position you would, heavily invest in, but they believe if you continue taking, opportunities to draft these project guys late, that eventually you'll land your Pekka Rinne. I think it's mostly been fool's gold, but unlike to avoid being redundant or at the risk of being redundant, this is the one area that I trust the organization in more than any other, and it's the draft. It works. It's clear it works. They draft, they develop. So there's no critiquing on my end.
Yep.
Heading into the last and final round, the 7th, got 3 names that I'm also not going to try to say.
Yep.
Rooting for you.
Yeah, man. All right. So pick 200, Igor Naumov. He's a goalie out of the MHL in Russia. This was 100% a reach pick just based off pure athleticism. Like you mentioned, he has great athleticism, and that's something that you take a chance on in the 7th round. So that's that pick. Pick 209, another pick out of Russia, this one being from the KHL's Nikita Guslastov. He's a forward. He's a guy going forward that maybe is 4th-line potential AHL guy. That's kind of how he projects. We'll see. We'll see if we see him in the future as a Cane or not. And then the last pick being 219 out of the SHL in Sweden, defenseman Joel Nystrom. He's a 2-way defenseman. Not much other information on that guy. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We have a lot of potential.
Me, and I know we just threw a ton of names at you guys, but it really seems like at least the first 11 guys up until the last 2 at least have a single trait that makes you think, wow, if this clicks, you could be, a commodity for the NHL club or trade bait or something. It's all about upside. They attack their board and they go after the guys that they want. I'm really excited about it. I've been super excited about the past couple drafts. They understand how to build here. And any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, like you mentioned, they've obviously shown the strategy is to draft high upside. They're not worried about slumps. They're not worried about maybe needing to mature a little bit. They're willing to take the risk that you're either going to break out of your slump and shoot through your ceiling, or you're going to mature or whatever it may be, or, oh, well, we move on to the next guy that we drafted you.
It's almost like the organization realizes you're not a finished product at 17, 18 years old, and they're going to invest resources into getting you, the best opportunity to hit that peak. Yep. Couldn't be more thrilled. Loved reading all the positive buzz afterwards, even without a 1st-round pick. So great stuff. I'm glad we finally had an opportunity to dive deep into the 2021 NHL draft. And I think the natural progression from that is to talk about a couple of these guys and other prospects that will be participating in the upcoming Prospects Tournament hosted by the Tampa Bay Lightning in Florida. It's actually going to be at the Advent Health Center Ice in Wesley Chapel, Florida, September 18th through the 21st. Anything going on that weekend for you? You're going to be down there?
Let me check my calendar. Hold on.
Think your significant other would be okay with you missing your wedding?
I have I have a wedding that day.
You're getting right, Delaney. You're getting married. Yeah, I don't think the podcast is going to make it down to Florida for the prospect tournament this year. I think we're going to be a little busy. But Mike, any of these recent draft picks going to be participating for the Canes prospect team down in Florida?
Yeah, so in goal, Patrick Hammerla is going to be there. He'll be joined by Beck Warm and E2 McIniemi. So 3 goalies that, are younger guys that will be excited to see play. They should do really well. Outside of that, from this year's draft, Bryce Montgomery will be there. Robert Orr, Justin Robidas, and that's it from the 2021
That's pretty
draft.
good to go ahead and throw 4 of your most recent draft picks in there. That's
for sure.
Actually a higher number than I originally anticipated, but I think the real story is not so much those guys. It's the heavy hitters of the Canes prospect pool, starting off with Seth Jarvis.
Yeah, Seth Jarvis will be there. I'm really curious to see what next season holds for him. He's obviously the number 1 prospect in the Canes prospect pool. There's no arguing that. He seems to be a step ahead of everybody in that regard. I think he should dominate this tournament.
If he doesn't, that draws into question if he has any chance to make the opening.
Yeah, he's going to need to dominate here, and he's going to need to dominate at training camp, and he's going to have to force his way.
In a perfect world, even if he does all that, I don't think you would want him to make your team, because I think we both still want them to bring in another top 6 forward.
Yep.
It becomes less likely every day, or does it become more likely? I don't know. There's no telling with this organization sometimes. I think what we're most waiting for is the announcement of the Svechnikov deal, which whenever that happens, we will be very pleased. No panic yet. I think as long as it's taken care of by training camp, no harm, no foul. But outside of Seth Jarvis, who are we looking at?
Dominic Bach will be there. We acquired him in the Justin Falk trade from St. Louis. He played in the AHL and played pretty well last season.
Another former first rounder.
Yep, a first rounder. He's a guy that I think has a chance to sniff the NHL lineup at some point, whether it's a call-up or whatever it may be. He's a guy that I think has a chance, and he should also be a guy that dominates at this tournament. Joey Keane will be there, who was acquired in the trade with the Rangers for Julien Gauthier.
We saw him for a cup of coffee last year. One game versus Nashville.
And we'll see. He's got a lot of room to improve.
Clearly not there yet, but a guy that you can still see it happening one day. Big name, Ryan Suzuki, still universally, for the most part, considered your number 2 prospect.
Yep.
I know had the weird eye injury and has had some bad luck. What are your thoughts on him right now?
He played pretty well in his limited time in the AHL. I think that was good for his development. We will see. He is still regarded as the Canes' second best prospect by many. I would probably hold him in that spot as well. I think Jack Drury is starting to make some ground on him. Both of these guys will be playing in the prospects tournament, and I expect Drury and Suzuki and Jarvis and Bach on all these guys that have NHL ready status in some way to their name. I expect them to be impact players at this tournament. And I think it'll be telling to see what they can do against their peers, people their age, people in their status. They should all perform really well.
Yeah, you'd assume at least the top 6 of this Carolina prospect team should be really good.
Very good.
Ahead of its the peers there from Nashville, Florida, and Tampa's farm systems. Anybody else you want to talk about? I'm glad you mentioned Jack Drury. I think he was the natural one because I think he's the last of these guys that has a legitimate shot to make enough noise to maybe crack the lineup. If not opening night, but sometime this year. Anything else you'd like to add on him? We've gone deep on him before.
Yeah, we've gone deep on Drury, and it's even a guy that management has mentioned when talking about depth in the lineup next year. He's always lived up to the next step. Every time he makes a step up in his career, he performs. He's a gamer, so he's a guy that could crack your lineup. He could crack your lineup from day one. It'll be interesting to see with all the moves the Canes made to secure their bottom six depth, how that impacts it. But
yeah, I think from a almost like being ready day one standpoint, Drury doesn't have near the ceiling of a Jarvis or a Suzuki. But if you made me put a chip down, who I think is the guy that has the most likely opportunity to crack the lineup day one, I think it's Drury. I think they trust him the most, and he's older, more mature, has a better two-way game. Even, like I said, even with less ceiling, but that's kind of what they need. You know, a guy that can kind of fill a role and, you know, gives you a little inside-outside versatility. I think they just trust the pedigree and everything he brings to the table, not only on the ice, but from a leadership standpoint as well. He's not going to be overwhelmed by the moment. And that would give you the opportunity to, you know, let Jarvis and Suzuki season a little bit more.
Yeah, and he's a guy that is a natural center, but you don't have to throw him into the fire right away like they did with Aho. You can start him on the wing, start him on the third or fourth line, and those are going to be dominant lines. They're both built very strongly.
Yeah, you
right
can kind of
now.
insulate him a little bit, right? Yep. Like he doesn't have to carry a line. He's not going to be thrust into a scoring role. Can get to the league and feel it out. I mean, Jarvis is definitely the most exciting. I mean, when they threw him into the AHL for that brief stint last year before he had to go back to the minors, it was pure dominance. And he's not going to come to the league and do that, but that just showed you what's there. And it immediately made it look like Carolina got a steal in the first round just a year ago.
Yeah, we're super excited about Jarvis. Another guy that you'll want to keep an eye on at the tournament would be Jamison Reese. He's a guy that kind of fits the Canes model of ultra competitive, big motor. He's got skill, compete. He's not the biggest guy, but he doesn't play his size. And, you know, he played well in his time in the AHL, and he's a guy that has an outside shot at being called up, whether it's injury related or just needing a spark in the lineup. So we have more guys than we've had in a while that I think are NHL ready, if not very close NHL ready. Obviously, just because they're NHL ready doesn't mean you automatically throw them into the fire, right? You want to make sure you're doing what's best for their development, make sure they're getting playing time, making sure they're seeing all the situations, whether it's 5-on-5, power play, penalty kill, you name it. If there's a better development opportunity in the AHL, obviously the Canes are going to take it. If a guy is ready to play in the NHL, I also don't think they're going to hold him down just for the sake of holding him down. So.
You know, they're not in a position where you're going to see them rush, a Ryan Murphy to the league. You know, that's not going to happen anymore. They're not just going to get guys there because they just have a dearth of talent on the NHL roster. I don't know. In reading more on who's going to be at, representing the other teams in this prospect tournament, I'm really looking forward to see them go against the Florida team. You're going to have Spencer Knight. That will be a true test for this forward group. Still think the Canes are the more talented team, but he has shown that he can be a legitimate NHL force, even just such a small sample size. So that if I had to circle one of the matchups, I think that's the one. And hey, I'm all here for it's Southeast hockey and getting those teams together. You know, I'm a fan of bringing the old Southeast division back together, and including Nashville this time. But yeah, I think this is awesome. Any other final notes on the prospect tournament before we get out of here?
No, I'm gonna probably have to watch it in some recorded fashion. I'll have to figure out how I can do that, but
we'll just hide it under the table, have it on the phones. But thank you guys for joining us tonight. I think we're all really excited about what we think we have on the docket for the next episode. Looking at having a special Carolina Hurricanes guest, our first guest on the podcast. So please join us for that. We're super pumped for it. And thank you for joining us tonight. Mike, tell them where to find us.
You can follow us on Instagram at The Rod the Podcast and on Twitter at The Podcast. Please make sure to subscribe, follow, like, and rate the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on. We are on, but not limited to, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Podbean, and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening, and don't hesitate to reach out on any platform.